it all prepared me for this moment, but in a different way. It prepared me to be capable of dealing with an emergency and then subsequent series of emergencies without having to let up or stop. But nothing prepares one, no matter who they are, for what's gone on in Maui. Let me tell everyone, I'm heartbroken to see the loss of life on Maui, the 111 souls that have been lost, and it will be more. Jamie's heartbroken. Our whole family, sends our prayers to them. But from the standpoint of responding, yes, this is something that requires an emergency focus, and we're going to be in this mode for quite some time. I did spend time on ground zero, actually, 3 times so far this week, and each time you see something more tragic than the last. It's going to be difficult, and I want people to brace themselves for a long period of recovery, for grieving as a state and as families. What we saw and the way we've seen people pass is tragic.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So much of the reporting we've been looking at is in what you and the other officials are calling the acute phase of this. We want to move ahead a little bit to the recovery phase, even though it hasn't started yet, because a lot of people have a lot of questions about that.
Yes.
One of the questions that's come up is there were meetings 2 days ago and yesterday with your chief housing officer, Nani Medeiros, talking to developers, landowners, community people about housing. Can you tell us any details about what came of those meetings?
Sure. Okay, so let me try to unpack this pretty broad question, and a great one. So what constitutes the acute crisis? Well, this is day 9 after the fire raged through with hurricane force winds through Lahaina, and it took over 2,500 buildings. It took the lives of 111 people and more. And so we're right now complete with 45% of the survey, the acute survey. We have 41 dogs with teams of, I believe now, well over 175 people helping go through the area. We believe by early next week, the acute recovery phase will come toward an end. There is a little bit of a caveat to that. We'll get to about 85% of the territory covered, and then the last 15%, which are the buildings that were 3 or 4 stories over on Maui, they're going to require some special equipment, which may take days to weeks to get through. But we'll have a pretty good idea of how much catastrophic loss of human life we have at that point. We already have addressed in this acute phase the scope of the land mass that's lost and the number of houses that have been lost. That part is rapidly, the acute phase is coming to an end, as are the fires. The fires are now embers for the most part at worst, although occasionally there's a small spark of fire, which is why we watch for winds. But again, the acute phase of the disaster and the crisis comes slowly to an end right at that point. Then becomes recovery. Now, keep in mind, we're doing recovery as we speak. The first part of recovery is to first decompress the shelters. People immediately went to shelters or went to their cars or went to friends' houses, neighbors' houses. They are now in recovery, in early recovery, going to hotel rooms. We have 707 people in 307 hotel rooms at the moment. We also are moving toward about 500 individuals in Airbnbs already and their families. These are programs we set up for, again, you could describe it as the acute phase of recovery because you can imagine people are still traumatized that their house is gone. Now, when we talk about the longer term recovery, intermediate and longer term recovery, that's when you start getting people resources from FEMA. They did get already individual amounts of money from Red Cross. People, I believe, got $700 from Red Cross if they signed up just to get through the week or two. Then deeper recovery occurs with FEMA, where people get larger amounts of money. Insurance starts to come in. But you're probably asking yourself, when does the recovery of actual housing get built, the long-term infrastructure? So let me give you some perspective for that. We'll do everything we can to the extent that the Lahaina and Maui community asks us to. to build housing quickly. In an amazing turn of events, we had the Emergency Housing Proclamation, which we were going to be talking about anyway today, so we'll talk some about it. It was focused statewide. As you know, cutting red tape gave some people heartburn because they didn't want us to cut back on too many rules as far as land use or historical preservation. But now we see that we do have need for housing. We'll still apply the same sensitivities to historic preservation, to environmental and cultural considerations. But now we're going to pivot the Build Back Better Committee,
Yes.
Build Beyond Borders, forgive me, and pivot that to focus on Maui. So for the next 60 days, I've at least tasked my housing team to focus all of their efforts to assess Maui, because that recovery is more acutely needed now than anywhere else in the state.
Okay, so to clarify, so the emergency proclamation on housing, while it still exists statewide, you're really going to be applying it to Maui?
For these next 60 days, yes. And we'll be assessing it internally and with others that are on that committee as the weeks go by. But I want all of our focus, particularly from Nani and Brooke and all of our team, I want them to be focused on Maui and its needs, because we're going to have to get something going for the Lahaina community on some level. Again, Lahaina and the mayor and the council will have to tell us, but there is some news I should share with you. And I had intended to share much of it tomorrow night, but I'll share some of it with you now. We already know that there's a 400-acre parcel that's state-owned that I believe is zoned already for housing just up above Lahaina. And what I have tasked my team to do is to prepare that for discussion for the next Build Beyond Borders meeting, okay? Because Build Beyond Barriers, forgive me, they always trick me with those three Bs, okay? Build Beyond Barriers, because I think that it's important that we know we're going to have to build some housing, but the question will be how long. Now, I've already talked about where we are as far as recovery, and most of it's going to be recovery of people's spirit, because everyone knows someone on Maui that's lost their house or a loved one. We may hear about children. All of these are incredible challenges to get over. But that community is going to have to decide whether it wants to still be a bed and breakfast community, a community where people can visit as Airbnb goes.
So, if I can interrupt, the property you're talking about and the process under the BBB committee,
yes,
there still is an opportunity for public comment, public participation, and discussion.
Absolutely, and more than people even anticipated under the current emergency proclamation. That's going to be a much larger discussion. I, for instance, have to go to the mayor and ask him, have you already had plans? He also has a parcel up above Lahaina that is very capable of being used for housing. We've already had an offer from one of the developers that was across town going to be doing, I believe, a 300-house development. They've told us if we wanted to pivot instead and build those houses that were planned for that area and instead build them over near Lahaina, they would be willing to do it. So that's a lot of discussions. It will be community involvement. It will have to be made clear that there's water. There are other considerations. For example, the acute recovery phase will end, and then the EPA will have to go throughout Lahaina and make sure that there's not asbestos or heavy metals or other toxins.
Right. I want to ask you about that later, but
yes.
let me ask another question about that addresses what you just talked about. So at one of the meetings,
yes,
with Nani Medeiros, the chief housing officer, there was a community leader, Archie Kalepa, who has there's a post of him talking about the meeting on social media. And he says, there was not one conversation in this meeting about the people. Every conversation was about getting rid of the permits so that they can steal water from our streams, so that they can fast track westernization development and forget about the culture in place. How would you respond to that? And to what extent will there be opportunities for people to express those concerns and try to make sure they really are addressed?
Well, I would say I respect anyone's opinions. I respect their comments. We've been talking for decades about building housing. We've been talking for decades about getting input. And for the most part, and I was a part of this myself, blocking developments in Kona when I was a young legislator, not participating in a constructive dialogue. we should have had a lot more housing in Kona, except that in my work with other people who are the very advocates now that may be opposed to housing, I was wrong then to not be more open-minded about needs, because I didn't realize at the time that those needs meant otherwise our people would leave, the local people would leave, we wouldn't have firefighters or teachers. That was the wrong way to think about it. Now, we are thinking about water, and we're going to talk a lot about that, I'm sure, today. But when someone says just fast-tracking for westernized development, let's get real here for a moment, okay? Right now, 14,000 local people leave every year. Who do you think those people are? Those are not westernized people. I mean, they are people from Hawaii, but these are local kids and local families that are leaving. The comments that you just read is the typical comment that's used to make sure no housing gets built. Now, I want to build housing the right way. I want to build it not on conservation land. I want to make sure that we don't ever do that we don't ever, and we could go longer if we have to today, if we have to get through to some of these points. But it's important that as your governor, I share this real perception with people. We can't just stop building again, and to come out of the gate in the first meeting and say it's all about this kind of antagonism between people who want to sell out to developers versus local people. It's the local people that are really suffering. Rich people from the mainland are doing just fine when they want to come and buy here. It's our local people that we need to build these houses for. That's the entire purpose of the emergency proclamation. It's just that there is an ingrained desire to impugn anybody who wants to build something. And maybe it's deserved. Maybe developers in the past at different times didn't do right by people, but now it's too late to have that same fight. And it's certainly way too late for Maui. Maui's going to have to build back in some way. So I will accept the fact that people will have trust issues, but long term, and we will have all these discussions, we will build housing unless the other philosophy prevails and they want Hawaii to shrink back population way down, not have middle-class housing, not have housing and support services, not have nurses and teachers. If that position prevails, all of the people who are housing uncertain or housing unstable and all of the people that have economic challenges will be forced to leave, because rich people will always be able to find a way to buy a one-off house or a condo. Regular people like us won't. So that's what I say to that. And it's a long answer to a tight question, but we have to move past that. And it's my job to move past that.
And are there ways to make sure the 400 houses or whatever you're talking about to go to local residents?
Absolutely. They can all be made to be in the affordable range. And then people will have the fight, well, what's affordable? I'll push the prices way down because I'll use state land. I use recovery monies. This is actually a rare opportunity to do housing much more quickly and much less expensively. But we'll still have to make sure that we are mindful that there's not kupuna iwi there, that there's enough water, and so on. But yes, that's one thing. Now, the question of building houses for local people, the goal that I have is that all the houses we build, all of them, are for local people. I need to say this, though. From a legal standpoint, from the U.S. Constitution, a governor is not allowed to simply say, a resident in Hawaii can buy a house, a resident from California can't buy this house. I will do all that I can with all that's within my arsenal to make them for workforce needs, for people that already have roots here. But this is a very tricky legal question. And as much as we would like to just snap our fingers and just do it for local people, it's hard. Having said that, Hawaiian Homelands is one way we can do it. The Department of Hawaiian Homelands, of course, though just for people who are 50% or more, can get a house. So that's one way, and that's why with Kali Watson, we're expanding our capacity to do that. And we may do more Hawaiian Homelands projects across the state with the emergency proclamation quickly. That's one thing. Also, of course, I'm going to try to relocate and find houses for everyone who wants one, who just lost their house in Lahaina. But right now, it's as though a bomb went off right in their backyard and they are shell-shocked.
Okay, getting back to Lahaina is going to require environmental cleanup, remediation,
Yes.
all of that.
Yeah.
And I want to get back to questions about water, but since you mentioned remediation and going back to Lahaina, how long does that take reasonably? Where are you in that planning? Excuse me. And have you hired a contractor? Where is that?
Yes. So I'm pulling out some notes here because I had this meeting yesterday, okay, and we're going about 20 hours a day right now, so I don't want to make any mistakes. So we've already started a debris task force. This debris task force, which is right now being carried out initially by FEMA and the emergency recovery people, Bob Fenton and their group. I've already met with the head of FEMA, in addition to pretty much every other national leader that you could imagine that works on these kind of disasters. The plan is this. First of all, they've given me the initial scope of the early recovery. This is going to be FEMA, federal dollars. The first thing we have to do, of course, is take care of our lost souls there. That's going to take several weeks, although most of that work will be folks in the EPA to assess and remediate what's out there. They have to remove things that are obvious contaminants like air conditioning, Freon, and wherever they can isolate pieces of structure that are clearly a problem that might have, say, asbestos associated with them or metals. They'll move those out. That's going to take a couple months. I believe this in this chart here, and I'll show it to you. It's about 2 to 3 months to do that, at least. Then begins the hard work of actually clearing everything else out. So this is just notes from just yesterday. We can probably go 50% faster than usual because I have so much support from President Biden. A couple of notes. These are just early notes. Search and rescue, at least 32 days. The NEPA compliance, 48 days. Then we have right of entry considerations, which sometimes takes time because we've lost families. Hazardous waste, these are just general estimates of days. It could take more or less. We're still waiting to see as much as 47 days for hazardous waste. And then we will have to begin the site assessments and to clear everything else out. We're going to need to bring in thousands of people to do a lot of this work, and we'll use what we can locally. It means having, like I mentioned, FEMA. It means having the Army Corps of Engineers, who I intend to contract with at this point. It means then going beyond that and having local people do some of the work if they've got the qualifications. I also intend to create a local jobs program, essentially a state WPA, a workforce entity, so that we can give local jobs and give training for people who may have lost their jobs from the catastrophe and come in. So when you look at one of these timelines, and I'll get the next update next Wednesday, it'll get hardened quickly. But this is probably going to be somewhere between a $500 million and a $750 million effort just to completely clean and remediate the land. This has been an important point. Now, forgive me for making this right now.
Yes.
A lot of people have asked, because I think I might have said something quickly, like the state might buy the land.
Yeah.
What I'm saying, and I'm not backtracking, I'm just clarifying here. I don't want any predatory activity on the land. And I've tasked my attorney general to create a moratorium so that there can be no predatory purchase or acquisition of our local people's land and take it from them. We may create some super fund to help secure people that would otherwise, in a desperate fashion, sell land. There have been people that are already trying to, in a predatory way, come and steal land, get it cheap, because some people are devastated and they just say, I'll take some money and go. We don't want them to be, while they're traumatized in that situation. I would like to see a long-term moratorium so that the land stays with all the local people. And to the extent that there are pieces around it that are state-owned or that the state can support, we should support our local owners so that they don't have to leave.
So, but yes, this is great. To make clear, though, the local owners don't have to pay to remediate. A lot of this is going to be paid for. They don't have to worry about that.
They don't have to pay anything, with the one caveat that if someone, and they shared this with me yesterday, if someone refuses to have the FEMA teams and the Army Corps of Engineers remediate it, so if they refuse to do that and have those professionals do it, and they choose to do it themselves, then they have to pay for it or would get some compensation and reimbursement. But if they make that choice to do what is really an impossible job, actually, I mean, I don't know anyone who could do that unless they had extreme engineering training and had done this before, they'll be, first of all, given, of course, opportunities to get whatever might remain. I have to tell you, by the second time I saw the tragedy there was nothing there. I will be shocked if someone goes in there and finds a jewelry box that somehow survived the 1,000-degree temperature. I mean, granite counters melted, engine blocks melted, but of course, people have a chance to get in there, see if they can find anything from their property. Then the remediation, which I will do all I can to accelerate. And then people can begin to say, do I or don't I want to rebuild? I hope everybody finds a way where they want to rebuild and Lahaina rises from the ashes like a phoenix. But I don't know what people want to do yet.
You mentioned before water. You talked about it last week. There's been a lot of talk about large landowners using this as an opportunity to regain control of water on Maui. Can you address that? What you said before was there are people who don't want water to be used to fight fires. That was, I think, provocative for a lot of people. Do you want to talk a little bit about water and the conversation you're saying you want to have?
Yes. Well, I'll tell you, I've not been contacted by any large landowners. Nobody. Okay. What I have observed, as I've been in the legislature for 14 years and lieutenant governorship for 4, and then a year as governor or half a year as governor, is that we do have this impasse over water on Maui. And what has happened? I mean, I was one of the guys fighting against cane burning. People will remind you that I went there and fought against, I don't know who it was it A&B or somebody that owned the cane fields, and fought against it because it was burning and smoke was going up. And I was one of the people that stood up against that. So in retrospect, what we have to do is, yes, we have to have water for the magnificent cultural things that we do with water across Maui. But what we've let ourselves do is reach a stalemate over and over and over again on how water will be used. So water has become a source of tension for regular household people, for the amount of water that the city and county can get access to, for its tanks, for its reservoirs. And that tension has put us in a very precarious position, because now you have vast areas of Maui and other islands too, vast areas that, number one, are dry as a bone. Two, because we haven't at least decided to do agriculture on them, have invasive grasses that light up like a torch when a spark of flame hits them. And our inability to make good decisions on ag that would be fair to all. We need ag, remember here. The inability to make green spaces that are, much more protective against the spread of wildfires. Our inability to accept that we do need housing instead of a no housing position, which we've had for, a decade, essentially on Maui. That doesn't work. Number one, we need houses for people, period. Okay, and now we need more than ever houses on Maui and in other places. Two, the world has changed. The world is heated. It is a drier planet. We have stronger storms. We had a hurricane hundreds of miles offshore spin 80-mile-per-hour winds, go to our border, to our land, and spread sparks of fire all across Maui. So, there wasn't just one fire, there were like 4 fires, right? So we have to have a much more honest discussion about water. And I know some of the people who are water rights folks, who I have been one over the years, are probably rolling their eyes and raging right now. But look, guys, we just lost lives because we don't have a water policy or a statewide plan that protects the land from burning. Now, we will bring experts in. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm saying I watched as a legislator and a lieutenant governor us do nothing to solve this problem. And so I'm taking action to begin to solve it. And we'll include people, we'll have the discussions, but we have to be more honest about it. And there are a bunch of examples of people just digging in and saying that they will never move out of the way so that water can be used. And if that happens, we'll have more fires.
Do you foresee modifying or lifting the water management area designation for West Maui?
I do. And under emergency rules, we have to do that. Now, even having said that, I still want us to be very mindful that we have all the water for all the cultural practitioners that need it. But those very practitioners will be also asking for us to rebuild homes for their neighbors and themselves. So this is a much larger discussion. When I asked for the Attorney General to enter into a comprehensive review, people immediately thought I was pointing the finger at somebody like, is it their fault or their fault? That's not at all the case. That's a comprehensive review of our policy on water, our policy on housing, our policy on how we use and when we don't use emergency precautions. What do you actually intend when you run the siren? Do you intend to show that there is a tsunami or a hurricane, or could it be any disaster? This has been a large question, so that's what that comprehensive review is about.
Including root causes, including maybe invasive grasses.
Everything.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you mentioned tomorrow night you're going to be talking
Yes.
A longer or a more in-depth conversation for the public. Can you talk a little bit about your outline, what you're going to be telling people without giving away too much content?
Well, actually, I've spoken in this first 25 minutes or so about most of the details that are in the speech, but much of the speech will be to describe to people where we are psychologically as a state, what the people of Maui are going through, what we can expect in the future. And I want people to understand where we are as a people. And so I will be speaking to us, not unlike when there's a State of the State address, but a State of the Crisis address. It will be repeated in time also because we will have to talk as things develop over the course of the weeks and months, like you were talking about recovery. But I want people, if they don't happen to all watch Stewart Yerton on Civil Beat, I want the entire state to be able to have the opportunity to hear some of these things. And it's going to be part of a more comprehensive discussion from a person who wants to explain and work through the harder, more complicated problems. I think we've glossed over a lot of the big battles over the years for many different reasons. And let me unpack that a little bit. I'm not trying to blame other governors or anything of the sort. But if you go back, we've been hit by a series of events that have been difficult. We had the collapse in 2008, the economic collapse, which held us back. Then a decade later, once we're finally emerging from that, we had COVID. And COVID paralyzed us for 3 or 4 years as to how we could really put real plans in place. Meanwhile, challenges rose. Homelessness became a larger problem. The housing crisis reared its head so that now we have this exodus of people. And now we have the calamity of a wildfire. So it is time for us to have a full and honest discussion about the root causes of these problems. How many houses have to be built? How and why? I would love to not have to ever use emergency proclamations or rules, except for when something like this happens, like a fire. But we have neglected to solve these problems on housing and homelessness and other issues like opioids for too long. And so that's what I want us to get to. I want us to get to a place where we either have policy solutions locked down, which would be better so I can just execute with our team, or a larger and more comprehensive dialogue, not like that quote that you wrote or that was written and that you read, I'm sorry, which just points the finger and says, these people are bad, these people are good. Really what I want to do is I want to have a larger dialogue, and I'm the kind of person that will have that dialogue.
Is one of the things a lot of readers keep asking us is modular housing, prefabricated housing. It's been difficult to get it here. Could this be an opportunity to get that sort of housing here, which could be built faster and cheaper?
The answer is yes. And we always have had the discussion to be respectful and mindful of those who are hardworking people that build houses from the ground up. And my understanding is that they have been in discussions with our people and with others that have proposed these things to actually do it. And I think it's safe and fair to say that because of the crisis in Maui, everyone will want whatever solution is available to, as quickly as possible, build housing that is going to provide dignity to people that live in it, even if it's just for a couple of years, and then repurpose the housing for others who are just starting into housing. But whatever way we can do that, we should. And so I think this is probably the beginning of an era where we spend some of our energy on modular housing. I don't think it's the answer for all things. I don't think it's what everybody wants all the time. But I sure think that there are individuals right now out there who are suffering terrible loss that would love to have a small house that we could put up quickly.
So it will be allowed. This is.
I hesitate to ever say I'm going to do it until I'm actually doing it. But we've all but decided that we should enter into a partnership with everyone who builds to do some of that to help the people of Maui.
And then next week, you're speaking to the legislature. And what is the focus of that? Can you give us a preview of that?
Well, I'm going to do it, but we could just send them an advance copy of this talk that we just had, because this is exactly the kind of thing that they're going to be asking and will want to know. There'll be more specifics in that meeting, I'm sure. I'll be updating them, just like I gave you the specifics today of the tragedy and how much of the recovery is completed and what the damages are. They tend, and I can say this out of my recollection as a legislator, they tend to want to know, okay, what's the cost? I signed $30 million over today to the emergency response. Of that $200 million that they had given me for discretionary spending, just so you know.
Right.
Well, I wrote them letters today to say we need $30 million of that to go over. I want to begin to have the discussion about the long-term projections, because after the recovery monies end and after FEMA has done what they need to do to stabilize us and move forward, then a lot of that will be on us. There will be insurance money, but there will be needs. There will be infrastructure resources. I have good news, though. I've spoken not just with the president several times, but also with the Secretary of Transportation, with the Deputy Secretary of the Armed Forces, and on and on and on. And they all tell us that they will be here to help us build to the end. So that means helping us with infrastructure, helping us with power, helping us deal with the large cost items, especially so that when our people decide to put their houses up, that we won't have to spend a lot of money to spend on all the other things around it. So a ton of support's coming. Really, it's just the tragedy of loss of life right now. That's that hurts the most, I guess. The fact that a fire in this era of calamitous climate change, frankly, caused this disaster. And I will tell everyone out there, the world is watching Hawaii. They're seeing that in the most isolated landmass on the planet that this can happen. And if it can happen here in Hawaii, where a fire takes a town because of a storm and because of dry conditions, it can happen anywhere. And so I think that we will take our loss and the tragedy, and we'll try to translate it into something that's good for Hawaii and then the world. And I hope that what we discuss as policy leaders and what we discuss as people who have experienced this will actually impress the world. I won't accept the typical he said, she said, or I'm against you dialectic. I won't do that. Instead, it has to be about Hawaii and its people and humanity. And that's where I am right now. I hope people already know that of me. Most people trusted me through COVID. Most people trusted me to serve as governor for a time. And I don't see any reason why most people shouldn't believe that we want to restore housing for those who have suffered terribly. But if there are still naysayers out there, just do me one favor, please. Whatever you do, say it sensitively or in a way that it doesn't hurt the people who are struggling on the ground. If you have to say something harsh, say it to me. Say it to my team, but don't say it in a way that will hurt people who are deeply devastated right now in Maui.
Thank you, Governor Josh Green, for taking 30 minutes to talk to us. We really do appreciate it. And again, you said gave us a lot of previews of things to come. Thanks again. I'm Stewart Yerton with Civil Beat, and this is Governor Josh Green. Thank you.
Thank you.